Hi there, and welcome to the Bloomsbury Health Podcast. This week, we'll be speaking to Tony Brown. He's a magnificent man with a crazy story you need to hear. So sit down, get comfy, have a listen. This is part 1 of 2.
Yeah,
Enjoy.
so what, in your words, Tony, like, why don't you explain a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what your clinic in Wembley does, and maybe some of just a little bit of background about yourself and your experiences
and what's led you to where you are today.
Yeah.
Sure. It started, I think, probably when I was about 15, and I don't think I was particularly unruly at school. I may have asked why I needed to learn things about dates regarding dead kings and queens, a little too often perhaps, and I got detention a lot as a result of that. And after they got sick of putting me in detention, I got sent to the doctor, who determined at the age of 15 that I was depressed and put me on antidepressants. And I was kept on those for the next 45 years.
Wow.
That's a really, incredible time span for something so potentially unneeded to be added into your life. Like, it's an odd thing to just blindly do and not follow up from,
Yeah, so that comes as like just a very dumb diagnosis. That's a dangerous thing to put a young person on opioids like that. Like that. So like with that experience in terms of that 45-year journey from being introduced to those prescription drugs through to where you stopped, what were the extremes in terms of that process? Like, did they? You're talking what, like, so 45? So you're talking about like the 70s?
Yes.
Yeah. So like in the 70s, that blind prescribing power, and that holding a doctor, and oh my God, it's a doctor. Like, they know everything. That would have been at the peak of that, correct? So
Very much so. And my mother was a psychiatric nurse. And again, she believed everything that she was taught, believed that everything the medical profession said was correct. Now, when I left school, I was trying to work out why this had happened to me, and I went and did a degree in psychology, thinking that would help. It didn't. I ended up working in local authority housing, and with life's ups and downs, I sort of had relationships, broke up, and so on, was in employment, out of employment, and so on. Along the way, they determined that there was something wrong with me, that I was not just depressed, but a chronic depressive. And so if you can imagine, from the 70s up until about 6 years ago, all the different types of drugs regarding depression that came into being. You've got Prozacs, you've got SSRIs, you've got the whole gamut of things. And each time a new one came out, I was told, well, the other one might have worked, but there's a new one that's come out that's even better. Now, in saying this, what I'm doing is just explaining what happens in medicine generally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like doctors, especially, again, it's been highlighted quite recently in the USA about the kickbacks, and in terms of like how doctors benefit from siding with these pharmaceutical companies. Is that a similar type of thing that would happen here? Is that what they were doing to you? You were a byproduct of these salesmen and these doctors partnering in these pharmaceutical areas?
Well, looking back, it feels like I was probably a lab rat of some sort. But then I suppose that's when I started to see how things worked, or didn't work, rather. I don't know if Sunil's got a comment on this, but I mean, the thing is, putting someone on very heavy antidepressant drugs at 15 when the brain is not fully formed, right to do. Now I understand that kids as young as 4 are being given this stuff.
Yeah,
That's so crazy.
to
Like,
heighten
me,
that. It's a lot to do with heightened numbers, and again with like exposure to these drugs means there's reliance on these drugs, as you would know first and foremost.
And I think it would affect your development as
for
well.
sure, for sure.
You know, I think like if I look back to, you know, and I've say from like 11, you grow into being an adult, you grow into being the person you are, being like stunted or your future altered by being handed this medicine, especially when they didn't really have any reference to the future side effects. It seems like, a bit of a mishap, really, in my opinion.
Certainly was. And then the other thing is that over the years, I've lost count of how many therapists or psychiatrists or psychologists I went to see. And very few of them had any idea what they were doing. A lot of them would ask me to come along week after week and talk about my past. Now, that's not a sensible way to treat someone who's depressed. It's like watching a horror film every week, which you don't want to watch.
Yeah.
Why watch a better film with a happier ending?
Yeah.
Why reignite and re-trigger on a regular basis? And then that makes things worse. So what do? You medicate it more and squash it down some more. Then you reignite it and squash it down some more. And I might be quite cynical in the way that I view things now, but as far as I can see, that's just a way to keep you in a cycle of sickness. It doesn't just happen with depression, it happens with all kinds of things from what I can see.
Yeah.
As I got older, my back went, and I had arthritis, sciatica, and a slipped disc. Now, after being told I'd be on antidepressants for the rest of my life, I was then told I'd be on these for the rest of my life. With those, after a while, they wear off. So then they gave me some injections in the back as well on a regular basis. When they wore off, they said, look, all we can do now is slice your back open and fuse your vertebrae.
Wild.
That's awful to hear. That must have been hard to take.
It was frightening, because I'm squeamish anyway. And then when I looked into some of the downsides of that, it was even more frightening. You could end up paralyzed, impotent, incontinent, or if you're really unlucky, all three. So I said, it really doesn't hurt that much. Now, probably about 14, 15 years ago, I found myself in a dark place. I had come to the end of the road with regard to employment. We'd hit 2008-9, recession, contracts dried up, bills piling up, repossession notices, notices to cut off the gas, electricity, everything else. And at the same time, another relationship came to an end. It's Christmas Eve. And I realized that I didn't have anything left in the house, food-wise, didn't have any money, and the person with whom I just ended the relationship walked out the door. Now, you can imagine at Christmas, most people around are having a bit of fun. You could hear Christmas music coming through from next door. You could hear Slade's Merry Christmas playing. They're having a party. And I'm feeling like shit at this time. So I decided I had enough, because this is about the third time I'd lost everything. So I got all the antidepressants I could find, which I had left. And I had about 2 or 3 bottles of cheap wine, and I took the lot. And I woke up in a mental hospital in a locked ward sectioned under the Mental Health Act on Christmas Day.
That's crazy. Can I ask, I guess, how you ended up there? Did someone come by and see you, or did you what got you?
Yeah, how did you get from your house to the hospital?
To this day, I don't know.
Wild.
So I don't know if the person who just walked out, came back, saw me, called an ambulance.
Yeah.
don't know if neighbours came in. I have no idea to this day.
So
It's so sad. I'm sorry.
that's such a wild ride up to there, because that's the third time. Because like, forgive me, I read in the information that you gave us that you were also put out to foster care when you were younger. So there's 3 significant moments in your life where the industry, like the ministries that be, whether it's the Mental Health Act or whether it's like the state or whatever you guys would call it here in the UK, is interjected in your life, and not always for the positive. Like, I understand that you being like found and saved essentially from that act you took because of the extremes that things had happened. But yeah, like if you in my eyes, from what you've just told us, like that problem started with putting you on the drugs originally. So like that cycle doesn't stop until you get to there. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now, in the hospital, it got even more bizarre. Because I arrived there, I didn't have a phone, so I didn't have access to anybody, didn't have any money, didn't have any clothes. And they would not let me out, obviously. They said that because I was sectioned, I was a danger to myself and other people, therefore had to stay there. And I said, well, how long for? And they said, until we say you can.
They deem it's okay. People that don't know you are now going to make a very large decision on what is okay for you.
Absolutely. Now that got even more frightening. A, because they doped me up to the eyeballs even more. And they determined that my depression was so intransigent that they had to give me electroconvulsive therapy.
Now, can you say what year that was? Because I read this in your bio and was shocked at what year this happened. So could you just say when this happened, like what year? Or
that was around 2012.
Ridiculous. And a
It's
modern,
insane,
like
honestly.
that I would have thought when I read that, I had to double take, because I thought it would have been in like the 90s. But
Even
no,
before then,
that was
crazy.
less than 20 years ago. That was what, 12 years ago as we speak now, in a modern age, and there are people here in the UK still giving that therapy to people is archaic. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. It was shocking to read that.
Yeah.
I mean, the strange thing was that they didn't just do it once. I've looked back on my medical notes since then. They gave me 19 sessions of it. Now, if you're not aware of what it is, they put an electrode either side of your head and they strap you down. They put something in your mouth so that you don't swallow your tongue. And then they pass a shock, a volt through you, which is supposed to alleviate your depression somehow.
Like, how did they get to that conclusion is beyond me.
So yeah, just to clarify that, you've been put into a hospital of people that have no idea of your medical background. You've been given outrageous amounts of painkillers while also suffering from opioid and antidepressant addiction. And now they've decided to strap you to a bed and electrocute you in some sort of thinking that that is a logical step to take. That's wild. That is insane.
Yeah.
What it did do in my case is I have lost parts of my short-term memory from around that time. So whilst I have some memory of what happened in there, and they're not nice memories, but I do remember looking around. There were people in a worse state than I was. There were people staring at the walls catatonically.
But on that note, like, so you're saying you saw these people in these institutes. How many of them do you think that was inflicted by the hospital? How many of them do you think were getting better? Would you say
Or
like,
it
or
kind of
actually
deepens
this,
the
yeah,
problem,
or do you
almost.
think that? So do you think it would be 50-50? Do you think be a higher amount of people that are actually worse off for being in there than they were than being in, say, around their loved ones, or in with someone that cared for them, like in a deeper level?
That's a really interesting question, because I think some of them may have had people who loved them who could have cared for them, and others didn't. For instance, there was one guy, I don't know what war zone he came from, but he would just run up and down the ward screaming, "Fire! Fire! Barbarians!" Now, as I said, I don't know what war-torn part of the world he came from, but he was in a much worse state, as far as I could see, than I was. And what he was seeing and believing he was seeing was horrific. And he obviously had no one else to care for him outside of that place at the time. So he could have been one of these people who's just picked up on the street where somebody sees him acting a bit strangely, call the police or whatever, and then his next stop is being sectioned. I think an example of it, some of you might have seen a film called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
And he leads the residents of a mental hospital on a sort of journey to escape, to not be locked in there and have their freedoms taken away. And when his plan gets sussed rather and rumbled, then they give him ECT to neutralize him, basically, so that he cannot continue with what he was planning.
Yeah.
And to a large extent, that's what it will do. It will shut you down and silence you. When I, again, tried to get out, found it very difficult. It was just pure luck. I found an old computer, may have been there a while, but I just hadn't noticed it, in the corner of the ward. And I went on this computer and I logged into Facebook. And I was scrolling through Facebook and I suddenly recognized the name of a guy who I was at school with probably 30 years previously. And I messaged him and said, "Long time no see, could you do me a favor? Could you come and spring me from a mental hospital?"
Wild. Jeez, that's
I bet
how
he
you
was
doing? Do you want to go
surprised.
for
Yeah.
a coffee afterwards? That's a tough one to get round.
And bless him, I mean, most people would just block, delete, and that's it. He drove all the way down from Warwickshire with his wife to North London, which is where I was in that hospital. They said, "We are his responsible adults. Now let him out." They did at that time.
Yeah.
If that didn't happen, I have no idea how long I would have remained in there or what would have happened next.
Yeah, you could have still been in there.
Possibly. I've no idea.
Terrifying.
So how did it feel leaving? You know, like, was it easy to kind of settle back into society, or did it all feel quite challenging and overwhelming?
I think it must have been about 6 weeks.
Okay.
Thereabouts. Yeah. Yeah.
That's electrotherapy 3 times a week. That's a lot. Yeah. Whew. Sorry. That's quite daunting when you think about that.
So how was it being back in, you know, the normal world, I guess? And did you find that you felt, like I said, sorry, did you feel like lost being back in society, or did you feel like relief?
Bit of both, really.
Yeah.
Bit of both. But you know, then gradually got back on my feet. And with regard to the house I was living in, I mean, an old work colleague turned up one day, well, rang up and said, "Can I come and see you?" And I said, no, because the house is a mess. I was a mess.
Yeah.
Not in a good way, having just come out of that hospital. Anyway, she turned up on my doorstep, would not go, and I'm now married to her.
What a lady.
Really nice.
Yeah, lovely.
And luckily, after a while, she said, "Look, why don't you move into my house and rent your house out, which then meant it was not repossessed. And gradually I got some contracts, got back on my feet.
Amazing.
Now, during this period, my back went completely, and this is when they said they were going to cut me open and so on. And then soon after that, I ended up on the floor screaming in pain, unable to urinate. And my wife took me down to A&E, and they said, looks like you've got a prostate problem here. Might be cancer. Let's line you up with some biopsies. In the meantime, here's some pills. So now I had this pill box, as I mentioned, 24 pills a day, morning, noon, night. And when you look at a box like that, when you've usually been pretty healthy, and you just think, wow, it's kind of coming to the end now. Is this what my life has come to? 24 pills a day. And a friend of mine said, look, you need to stop taking this stuff. It's going to kill you. And I said, well, what do you suggest? And he sent me to go and see a friend of his who's a kinesiologist. Those who aren't familiar, it's somebody who does something called muscle testing. So you hold out your arm and you ask pointed questions to see whether or not your body accepts what's being said as the truth.
Yeah.
Test it. You can ask somebody what their real name is or a false name, and your body doesn't lie. It will answer accordingly.
Okay.
And what the kinesiologist said is your body doesn't like any of these pills whatsoever. Don't do this at home, folks. He said, what I'm going to do is give you some vitamins and minerals to tide you over. And he said, it's not going to be pleasant. In fact, it's going to be very unpleasant. See how you get on. First, I was really scared. I said, no, I've been told I've got to take all this till I die. And he said, if you do that, you're going to die sooner than you think. So anyway, I stopped taking them, had the vitamins and minerals, and I spent about 2 months shaking and sweating. Because that was all the
So
medicine taken
withdrawal symptoms, really.
coming
It
out.
sounds like withdrawal. Yeah.
Coming
Yeah.
out. Exactly. It was very tough withdrawal, and it was cold turkey. And I rang him up after 2 months, said, I can't hack this. I need to go back on the pills.
Yeah.
And he said, why don't you go and get some colonic irrigation to help wash it out?
Mhm.
Which I did. And the lady who performed that task said, have you ever heard of or tried bioresonance? And I said, never heard of it. What's that? And she gave me a card with the practitioner's name and details on it. Said, go and see this guy. I went to see him, and I've never seen anything quite like it. He made me sit on a metal grid, which was plugged into this device. And he started and said, let's start with your prostate. So he gave me about 3 sessions of bioresonance focused on that. After that, I went for the first biopsy. Horrible, uncomfortable procedure.
Mhm.
Afterwards, he said, I don't know what's happened, but let's monitor it. Come back in a few weeks, have another biopsy. Went away, had some more bioresonance, came back, had another biopsy. I was virtually screaming at this point because the first one, I could see what was going on a screen in front of me. Now, if you can imagine somebody going inside you and doing all kinds of stuff there, it was horrible. I said, I don't want to do that again. You're going to have to knock me out. I don't want to see it or be conscious while it happens. After the second biopsy, he called me and said, look, here's the good news. You haven't got cancer, and I'm discharging you back to your GP. And that was a huge relief, obviously.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, definitely. I mean, still not a fun thing to go through, but it must have seemed so worth it when you found that out.
Quite. And so I went back to the bioresonance guy and I said, I think you may have contributed to this. Now can you sort out my back, sciatica, slip disc, arthritis? He said, yep, think so. And so he put some pads on me, plugged me into this device again, did several sessions of this. And I thought, you know what, this doesn't hurt so much. And then after, say, a few weeks, I was able to throw away the painkillers The pain had gone. I was able to go back to the gym, drop 2 stone. And I went back to him and said, why don't people know about this stuff? I said, I was going to invest in property. Don't care now. Get me these devices and teach me how to use it. And
That's amazing.
that
I mean,
was
I feel like this is going to seem like a dumb question, but could you explain a bit more about the process? Because it's not something I'd personally heard about.
No, I mean,
And it's very intriguing. And I think people listening would probably like to, get a bit more intel on it.
I understand that, because when that lady said to me, have I ever tried it? I thought, what are you talking about? So I went to this guy. He had a device which had all sorts of knobs and dials and things on it.
Mm-hmm.
And he took a swab of my saliva and put it into this device. And he hooked me up with different pads, which were placed on different parts of me where the pain was. And that was plugged into this device. This device has within it about 2,000 frequencies linked to all different parts of the body. Now, the body has an optimum frequency for each organ, for each part of the body. And what this device does is find out what your optimum frequency should be. Now, where I was out of sync, what it did was harmonize it and bring it back into sync.
Okay.
Now, you can't feel the process while it's happening to you, unless you're extremely sensitive. So we've had clients in who are autistic, really quite autistic at that end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
They can feel it, and they're going, hoo, because they can feel tingling as it goes through them.
That's so interesting.
It is. I can't, and most people can't. But people at that end of the spectrum seem to be able to feel it, which is interesting.
Almost more in tune in that way than in like a behavioral way. Like it's almost like their behavior, like a lot of autistic people and things like that, that autism is like usually comes out in a behavioral sense. But yet like their bodies are more in tune. Like they might be more in tune with their body. That's why they can feel it.
I don't think it's something that should necessarily be seen as a disability. I think it's just people who have a different way of thinking. It doesn't mean it's like a negative. I know it's kind of aside from what we're talking about. But
on the ADHD spectrum as well, some of them have a superpower because they can focus on a number of things really deep, and they can do things that other people can't. So as you say, not necessarily a disability at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're able to feel the frequencies when they're at that end of the spectrum. It's just something that some of them seem able to do. Now, the way it works, if you can think of, you may have seen a video of an opera singer and a glass.
Yeah, it's at a certain frequency.
That's right. We'll sing and hold a note until the glass shatters. And that's because the resonant frequency of the note that is being held will shatter that glass. Now, if you think of that with bioresonance, it's like holding a frequency against a sick part of the body until that's done as well. That's, in a very simplistic way, is how it works. It's based on the principles of quantum physics.
Wow. These types of conversations, we can get other people tuned into that mindset. That it doesn't matter how you do it, it's that you did it. And you shouldn't be judged for that.
It's a very personalized thing. And I think, the point that you made there is so important, especially about double-blind, randomized, controlled experiments to the 95th percentile, is it significant or not, blah, blah, blah. Because even if you look at a lot of medical trials, it might come out statistically significant, but then you have to look at who's funding those trials. And there might be some conflict of interest in some instances.
I think even the phrasing sometimes in papers, they know how to say, well, it worked for, say if it worked for 10% of people, they can be like, well, there was progression with this, and how you phrase things in terms of like medical papers and things like that, you can make it sway towards what you want it to say. I didn't really explain that very well, but do you know what I mean?
Like you were saying, like, keep going, Tony. Like what you were
yeah.
saying about how, like, depending on who the sponsor is and who the manufacturer of that drug is, what I think what Beth was saying here is that what they perceive and how they would like it to be perceived post drug trial is up to them. Is that what you were trying to say?
Pretty much so. Because when people say, you know, how does this alternative stuff work, and, you know, where are the scientific experiments to show this? And I can show them some. And PubMed has lots of things about bioresonance, about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, red light therapy, which can be shown. But then I say, well, you know, who's funding an investigation into oxygen? Oxygen's not. It's not patented, and that's what it comes back to. It's whether it can be patented. And if it can be patented and sold to the educational or academia, then they're going to be funding academia to find certain results in some instances. Now, some of those instances, they might be playing with a straight bat, but it's not inconceivable to assume that in some instances they're not playing with a straight bat. And these are the difficulties and intricacies of having a discussion about this, where some people are very much, this is it, this is the science, follow the science. And others are saying, well, what is the science? Because science is something that evolves. And if you don't keep testing it and moving forward, then nothing happens. And so when people turn around and say, you know, we own the science, or nonsense like that, certainly in my mind, it sets off a load of question marks.
Yeah, we've had a recent experience come back around to us that's exactly what you're saying. Beth believed in a scientist that we're going to have on this podcast called Dr. Saskia Biscuit, and she developed a peptide-based vaccine that is an individualized case-by-case cancer vaccine. Now, I was told to my face by an NHS doctor that if my wife did this, it would kill her. And that if the things that that we were doing, that I was crazy and that I was contributing to making her condition worse. And I couldn't believe it. One, that like someone would be that incredibly negative to someone that they barely knew. And two, the fact that we were given a no options. There was no options. It was, hey, you have 18 months to live. Thanks for the visit. And we're 5 years on, and just today on the BBC, there was a report about a vaccine trial that is starting in the UK. Now, if I could visit that doctor that told me that, I would do it with a huge smile on my face today, because that could have been so detrimental to our progress and so detrimental to other things that are now is accepted and is looking to be accepted as mainstream. So like, I think you're so correct, Tony, in the fact that it's a perception of what you think is correct, and like that perception of what could be considered a mainstream thing is only by the people that are doing these things and the people that are publishing these things. Get that in the perception that's given. Like, you can only give these doctors the information that's available, and they make these calculated decisions on what's available. And it's to say, I think as well, it goes along with, and I think you'd be familiar with both you guys would be familiar with this, is about like the mushroom industry now, in terms of like the different types of mushrooms that people are taking as a supplement base, whether it be lion's mane or turkey tail, or I think you were telling me about one just the other day with Georgia, who's the nutritionist for the Bloomsbury group, who's telling us all that like the mushroom thing is the next thing to be trying to get us to the next step of being the most healthiest. And like, if you told someone that even 3 years ago, they'd tell you you're crazy.
It's absolutely true. And I think the other thing is the mind-body connection. We have people who come in to see us who may have cancer, and they say, "Oh, I've been told I've got so long to live." this is how long. Now, in some of those instances, when you tell somebody that in those start terms, some people will start to shut down. You say to somebody, you've got 6 weeks, and the body will start, okay, I'll put my affairs in order.
It believes it. Your mind is believing it, so your body follows it.
Yeah.
They can internalize it, and you may have read, things like Dr. Bruce Lipton, the body keeps the score and things like that. When you tell people things, they will internalize them, and it'll have an impact on the behavior, their beliefs, actions. And depending on how much faith that person has, that corresponds to how much of an effect it will have. And if that person has a white coat with lots of letters after their names, it might have a big impact, but it might not necessarily be true.
Yeah.
And so it depends entirely on who's giving the message, what faith you have in that person, and how you respond. Now, I, like most people, used to believe everything a person in a white coat would tell me. And I know now that it's not their fault in many instances. It's just the system that they're brought up in. And it goes right back to school, really. Those who put their hands up, very obedient, doing this, that, and all the rest of it, would often rise to the top of the class. And those who were a little more recalcitrant wouldn't. And those who played the game often rose to the top of the academic tree, and they became doctors, lawyers, bankers, and so on. And other people didn't. Now, however, I think that that's starting to change, because the educational system is changing. Similar to the health system, people don't all believe that the educational system is brilliant.
Yeah.
It serves everybody. And I think that now that people are starting to put the two together, I think that there are going to be some changes, because it's becoming very clear now that you don't have to have a degree in lots of letters after your name to rise to the top of the tree. AI is going to take out quite a few of those jobs anyway in future. So different skills are going to become more important. And really the softer skills, talking to people.
When you're working with people, how much of it do you think of it as experience, and how much of it do you think is it the treatment that follows? Do you think people are coming in to get your perspective and then go on to see what's next, or are they coming in solely for the different treatments you offer, or is it a bit of a combination of both?
It's a mixture, and the type of clients that we get are a complete mixture as well. We've had people, we've had a Harley Street doctor bring in his patient with Alzheimer's, because he said, I've given him all the drugs I can, but I know that oxygen therapy might have a positive impact on his cognitive decline. It might slow it down a bit, because oxygen to the brain is always good.
Yeah.
So Beth does a daily oxygen therapy of an hour. We have an oxygen machine in the house, and Beth's done that for 5 years. We've done that since pretty much day dot. It's one of the first things we bought, actually.
And I think it's like something that's so underestimated.
Yeah, people don't understand how much casual pollution and casual toxicity they're getting from their air because of cars, infrastructure, urban, like different factors. Again, you keep going, Tony. But yeah, we definitely we align with that too, just to back you up there.
Oxygen, it does so many things. In particular, it decreases inflammation, which is at the root cause of so many chronic illnesses. We've got chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, long COVID, sports injuries.
Yeah.
So we get sports people coming in, particularly around the marathon time. We had a lot of people come in for oxygen therapy to prepare for the marathon. And then afterwards, when they're a little bit crocked or whatever, coming in to get more oxygen, because again, that's going to help them heal quicker.
Yeah.
We get people who've had surgeries. So if you've had stitches, for instance, if you have oxygen therapy afterwards, and sometimes even before, but certainly after and then some red light therapy that will reduce scarring.
Cool.
Then there are people with long COVID who are really shattered, wiped out all the time. And again, it just boosts the body, gives the mitochondria a little bit extra, and so helps people to keep going. It's got a myriad of benefits, which, again, people are not aware of in many instances.
And Tony, when you think of hyperbaric oxygen, what comes into my mind is a diver that's been diving and then has developed some sort of nitrogen sickness and is sitting in this huge metallic claustrophobic place. Is that what it's like with the hyperbaric chamber that you have?
The one we have isn't like that. Ones like that do exist. They perform the same function.
Right.
You have two types. One is a hard shell, literally what it sounds like. It can either be glass or metal. And what we have is a soft shell chamber, which you sit inside, a bit like a tent, and you're zipped inside. And then that's filled with ambient air. And you wear a mask over your nose and mouth. Now, normally as we breathe, we're breathing in about 23% oxygen. When you go into the chamber with the mask over your mouth, it's pushing it up to about 95% oxygen.
Whoa.
Wow.
And that's where the benefit starts to happen. Now, you might remember there was a thing about Michael Jackson who used to sleep in his oxygen chamber. If you think about the dancing that he used to do, he used to crook himself all the time, leg injuries, foot injuries, because to dance like that, that's going to happen. So he would sleep in the chamber, and that would help heal quicker so that he can get back onto the stage and practice dancing without such a big gap in between. This happens quite a lot with sports people. So Ronaldo's got his own oxygen chamber, which keeps him at the top of his game. If he gets injured, go in that, back on the pitch. Because for sports people at that elite level, time off the pitch or off the track is money.
Yes.
So, hence, for them, it's beneficial.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, the
and
All
I think
Blacks
so
use those,
overlooked.
Yeah, the All Blacks use those like hyperbaric chambers and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Again, it's not the same thing, but Beth did do you guys do hypothermia treatment where it raises the human body temperature and stuff like that? Is that stuff that you guys do?
It's not something I've done, but I do.
Honestly, it's real tough. They just raise your body temperature. I think by 3 degrees?
It's by quite a lot.
Yeah, and you just have to lie in this like heated like chamber, and you get so overwhelmed and hot. It's like one of the hardest treatments I've done, if I'm honest. It's like really tough, but like because it artificially raises your body temperature, it's meant to encourage it fighting illness. But yeah, very.
It just
very
sounded
tough.
like a similar line to the oxygen therapy, where it's like it's using your body to heighten it.
Yeah.
Like you're giving a pure oxygen, but the body still has to do something with that pure oxygen, and that gives you the right tools to be able to do it yourself without having to add supplement or add like you had opioids and painkillers.
That concludes part 1 of the story. Please tune in later this week to find out more.